Good to see you in a new video on Betrayal Wife Tales. Today I'm going to tell you an interesting story of our subscriber.
I caught my wife with another man in our bed, and I threw him out of my house. Oh man, this is a wild one. I'm Mike, 44 years old, and my soon-to-be ex-wife Emily is 39. We've been married for 11 years, no kids. For most of our marriage, we were the classic chubby couple, happy, but not really paying attention to our health. 2 years ago, though, I had a routine blood test, and it came back showing I was at high risk for diabetes, hypertension, and gout. That was a wake-up call. Both of us decided to make a major lifestyle change. Over the next year, I dropped from 260 pounds down to 190 pounds, and Emily went from 183 to 145 pounds. It felt amazing, and luckily, I avoided those looming health issues. We started hitting the gym regularly, almost every afternoon. That's where we met Rob, the personal trainer. Rob, or Baldy as I'll call him, was one of those guys who loved showing off his physique. He was ripped and not shy about it. I noticed early on that he had a habit of checking out women, especially when they were working out. But at first, I didn't think much of it. When Emily started losing weight and toning up, she caught the attention of a lot of guys. I felt proud of her, but also a little uneasy when I saw the way Baldy looked at her. Emily has always been beautiful, with great curves, and I wasn't blind to the fact that other men were noticing, but I trusted her, or at least I tried to. One day, we were both on the elliptical machines, and Baldy was using the cable machine right in front of us. Out of nowhere, he took off his shirt and started flexing while doing crossovers. I looked over at Emily, expecting her to roll her eyes, but she was staring at him, biting her lip no less. I felt a wave of jealousy hit me like a ton of bricks. I glanced back at Rob, and the smirk on his face told me everything. On the drive home, I brought it up casually, trying not to seem too bothered. "Did you see Baldy showing off back there?" I asked. Emily looked surprised. "Oh, really?" "I didn't notice," she said, her tone way too nonchalant. "You were staring," I shot back. She shrugged. "I must have been zoning out or something." I let it go, but deep down, I knew something was off. A few weeks later, I was spotting Emily while she did squats on the Smith machine. Out of nowhere, Baldy swooped in, placing his hands on her waist under the guise of helping her. My blood was boiling. I stormed over and snapped, "I've got it from here!" Baldy just gave me his usual smug smile and said, "No problem, buddy." He calls everyone buddy. It's infuriating. Emily turned to me, her eyes wide. "Mike, seriously?" she muttered. I clenched my jaw and said, "We'll talk about this at home." That conversation at home exploded into a full-blown argument. Emily accused me of being jealous and insecure. I told her that I knew Baldy was making moves on her, and she admitted that she noticed it too, but brushed it off, saying she'd never cheat on me. "Then why the hell are you letting him touch you like that?" I shot back. She said she didn't want to make a scene at the gym. After an hour of yelling, we agreed to switch gyms. But the tension between us didn't fade. Emily was angry that I didn't trust her, and the resentment only grew over the next few months. 3 months after switching gyms, a big opportunity opened up at my job, but it required me to work in the afternoons. Emily and I discussed it, and we agreed that I should take it. That meant we'd no longer work out together. I'd go in the mornings, and she'd continue going in the afternoons. This is where everything started falling apart. Emily became distant. She stopped responding to my texts, my jokes, the memes I sent, even my messages saying I missed her. All I got back were one-word replies. Yes, okay, or ha-ha. I suggested couples therapy, but Emily refused. She said I was the one with trust issues and I was the one who needed therapy. Desperate to fix things, I went. I spent the next year in therapy, working on myself, trying to save our marriage. But Emily's behavior didn't change. She wasn't interested in intimacy anymore, and she brushed off any attempts I made to talk about what was going on. I searched her phone for evidence of cheating, checked her car for a second phone, even reviewed her location history, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. It all showed the same routine: work, home, gym. Still, my gut told me something was wrong. Emily said she was just going through a midlife phase and that it would pass. I had no solid proof, so I kept trying to make things work, all the while feeling more and more like I was losing her. Then came the day that shattered everything. We live in a condo, and one morning, the security guard, a friendly guy named Mr. Johnson, mentioned that his shoulder was sore from moving a heavy sofa the day before. "Maybe you can ask your wife's massage therapist to help out," he joked. "What massage therapist?" I asked, confused. He gave me a curious look. "The guy who came by yesterday to give her a massage," he said. My heart sank. "Do you have a video of him?" I asked. I must have looked pale because Mr. Johnson quickly pulled up the security footage. And there he was, Baldy, strutting into my home. I called in sick that day and followed Emily that afternoon. She parked at a mall where the gym is located, and sure enough, Baldy was there waiting for her. They acted like a couple, hugging, laughing, even kissing. I felt sick. I followed them to a residential area, but the guard at the gate stopped me. I couldn't believe it. I was watching my marriage fall apart right in front of me, and I had no idea how to stop it. I called Emily, but her phone was in her car. That's why her map history never showed where she really was. And that was the night I realized the woman I thought I knew had been slipping away from me for months, maybe even years. It was the last night I would ever sleep in the same bed as Emily. After I returned the car to my coworker, I drove home feeling hollow. The weight of what I'd just discovered sat heavily on my chest. I dialed my parents, needing someone to talk to. My dad picked up, and as soon as I heard his voice, the dam broke. I told him everything, sobbing like a kid. He listened patiently, then told me to calm down and focus on gathering evidence. My marriage was clearly over, but I needed to protect myself. He said he'd reach out to one of his friends, an excellent divorce lawyer. About an hour later, Emily called. She must have noticed the 2 missed calls. I managed to keep my voice steady as I told her I was already home. "I'm on my way back from the gym. My butt is killing me," she said like nothing was wrong. "Yeah, I bet it is." When she walked in and saw my red, swollen eyes, she asked, "What happened? Why were you crying?" I don't know how, but I kept it together. I forced a smile and said, "I think I'm coming down with the flu. That's why I left work early. You should keep your distance. I don't want to get you sick. I'll sleep in the spare room tonight." She didn't argue. "Okay, but let me know if you need anything." She went to bed, and I lay there in the guest room crying silently. I couldn't sleep at all. Around midnight, I heard her giggling. It didn't take a genius to figure out she was probably texting Baldy, but I didn't have any proof. Then a thought hit me. How had I missed it before? Maybe Baldy was disguised as one of her female co-workers in her phone. The next morning, while Emily was in the shower, I grabbed her phone. We both had access to each other's phones. She never had a reason to think I'd be suspicious. I quickly created a session on my laptop, syncing her messages, and put her phone back in its place before she noticed. As long as her phone was on the same Wi-Fi network as my laptop, I'd be able to see her messages in real time. And there it was, right under a female name with a profile picture of a dumbbell. Clever. I clicked in, but most of the conversations were deleted. What was left were vague exchanges using work-related code words. "Can you deliver the papers on my desk?" Emily doesn't have a desk at work. "Heading to the meeting, where are you?" The most damning one. "Boss is in his office." He's clueless. That one stung. I'm boss, clearly. I know her actual boss is a woman. She was playing me like a fool. Emily stepped out of the shower and looked at me. "You look terrible. Maybe you should stay with your parents for a few days." I shook my head. "Nah, I'll be fine. Just need some rest." I couldn't leave. Not yet. I needed more evidence. After Emily left for work, I called my dad and gave him the lawyer's number. The lawyer told me that the screenshots I'd taken wouldn't hold up in court because the name in the conversation wasn't Baldy's, and there was no solid proof of infidelity in the messages. They were smart, leaving just enough to make the conversations look innocent. He also warned me that any pictures I took of Emily and Baldy at the mall would be useless. They could easily claim they were just friends, and I couldn't follow them into the residential area without risking legal trouble. At work, I was in a daze, my mind racing with how to gather more evidence. Maybe I could install hidden cameras in the house, but Baldy rarely came over, and Emily would probably find them. I needed to be out of the picture for something to happen. That's when the plan hit me. I texted Emily, saying I tested positive for the flu and would be staying with my parents for a few days in case I needed help. She was surprisingly enthusiastic about the idea. "Take care of yourself. I'll miss you, but I'll call you every day," she said. Yeah, right. As soon as I hung up, I called my dad and my brother. When I got home later that evening, Emily had already packed a suitcase for me. She seemed so eager to get rid of me, it was almost laughable. "I'm just going to grab my laptop," I said, pretending everything was fine. I checked her phone again. She had just sent Baldy another coded message. "Boss will be out of the office. Want to come to my desk?" She sent that right after I told her I'd be leaving. Perfect. She took the bait. We didn't have dinner together that night. No hugs, no kisses, nothing. She kept checking her watch, and I could feel the tension in the air. As I was heading out the door, I forced myself to act casual. "I'll miss you," I said, expecting her to slam the door behind me, but she walked me all the way to my car. That's when it hit me. Why would she do that? It would be suspicious if her massage therapist showed up now. Of course, Baldy was already here, probably hiding in her car, waiting for me to leave. After I left, I circled the block and returned. My dad and brother had been watching the building, waiting for Baldy to show up, but he never did. I crept back into the condo and quietly let myself in. I could hear music coming from the bedroom, and that's when I heard it. Moaning. I tiptoed closer and saw their clothes tossed carelessly on the sofa. My heart was pounding, but I knew I needed to stay calm. I pulled out my phone, hit record, and opened the bedroom door. There they were. Emily, the woman I'd spent 11 years of my life with on all fours, and Baldy right behind her. Their faces were priceless when they saw me standing there. Emily screamed and scrambled to cover herself with the blanket. Baldy, in full alpha male mode, got up, completely naked, and started walking toward me. I managed to snap a picture of him mid-act before he got too close. "Why don't you go for a walk, buddy?" he growled, trying to intimidate me. Without thinking, I slapped him across the throat, a move I remembered from that old Mel Gibson movie, Ransom. Baldy collapsed, gasping for air, coughing violently on the floor. I stood over him and yelled, "Get out of my house!" I threw his clothes at him just as my dad, brother, and Mr. Johnson, the security guard, arrived at the door. "I've got this," I said, shutting the door behind them. Then I turned to face Emily, who was huddled on the bed, wide-eyed and speechless. Jane was still sitting on the bed, trembling, covering herself with the blanket. Her eyes were wide with fear, as if I might hurt her. I stood there for a second, then said, "I have never hurt you, nor will I. Get dressed. I'll be waiting for you in the living room." She nodded and quickly went to get dressed. While I sat on the couch, I sent the video I recorded to my lawyer. A few minutes later, his reply came through, "I'm sorry you're going through this, but jackpot." Jane came out of the bedroom after a few minutes, fully dressed, but she couldn't meet my eyes. I hit record on my phone and asked, "Why?" Silence. She didn't answer. "Was I such an awful husband to you?" My voice cracked, but she still said nothing, just started crying softly. "Do you love him?" I pressed. She shook her head, but still not a word escaped her lips. Frustrated, I stood up and slammed my hand against the table. "Say something, Jane, damn it!" She flinched and looked at me like a frightened puppy, wide-eyed and trembling. It struck me then. I had never yelled at her before, not once in our 11 years of marriage. I took a deep breath and sat back down. "My lawyer will contact you about the divorce. You'll need to get a lawyer, too." Finally, she spoke. Her voice was shaky, pleading. "We can fix this." "Fix what?" I said, shaking my head. "Our marriage was over the moment Baldy entered the picture. You chose him over me." "It was a mistake," she whispered. "No, it wasn't. It was a choice, Jane. You chose, and now these are the consequences. What did you think was going to happen when I found out?" She had no answer. Silence fell between us again. "Go to your sister's place and tell her the truth, or I will. I'll show her the video." My words were cold, but I was done. I couldn't look at her anymore. Jane's face fell, and without another word, she turned and went back to the bedroom to pack. I followed her, watching as she neatly folded her clothes, each movement graceful, methodical. The same little things I used to love about her. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of sadness and guilt. It was hard to believe that the woman standing in front of me was no longer the wife I knew. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I went to the spare room and broke down, ugly crying like I hadn't in years. My body shook with the sobs, and I heard when she quietly closed the front door behind her, taking her things and leaving my life. She even picked up the clothes they'd left on the sofa. She made the bed where I had caught them. It was like she was trying to erase every trace of what happened. Much later, I called my dad. He told me that Baldy had initially wanted to press charges, but Mr. P, the security guard, had informed him that he hadn't signed into the condo. That meant he was trespassing, and the building management could press charges against him if they wanted. He quickly dropped the idea and left. My nosy brother, of course, had been eavesdropping at the door, but Dad pulled him away by the ear and dragged him back to the car. I was exhausted. The last few days had been a nightmare, and I hadn't slept properly in what felt like forever. I crashed in the spare room and passed out. The next morning, my phone was flooded with messages from Jane. Apologies, begging for a second chance, desperate pleas for me to reconsider. I didn't bother reading most of them. I just blocked her number. Later in the day, my sister-in-law called. Apparently, Jane hadn't told her what really happened, just that we were fighting. I didn't tell her the full story either. It was too much to deal with, and honestly, I didn't want to. I couldn't help but think how lucky it was that Jane's father wasn't alive to witness her behavior. She had been his youngest child and his favorite. Their bond was unshakable. Her mother, though, wouldn't understand any of this. She had senile dementia. All of this happened just a week ago. By next week, Jane will be served with divorce papers. Update. Hey everyone, I'm back with a juicy update. I think you're going to enjoy this as much as I did. But before I dive into the details, I want to address a few things. First, I want to thank everyone who reached out with advice, support, or just to say they cared. I've read about the overwhelming support people receive online, but experiencing it firsthand has been incredible. From the bottom of my heart, thank you. Second, I know my English isn't perfect. It's not my first language, so I probably made a mess of a few sentences and confused some prepositions. I also mistakenly said Jane was doing sit-ups in my original post. What I meant to say was she was doing squats. Third, for those who think my story is fake, you're entitled to your opinion, but I genuinely hope my story can help someone in the future, just like others have helped me. Fourth, regarding how I hit Baldy. It wasn't some fancy ninja punch. It was just a simple chop to the throat, and honestly, I was lucky to react before he did. I won't lie, though. Watching him choke and cough on the floor felt damn good. Fifth, some of you found an old post I made in Ask Reddit a month before D-Day. It never got posted because I didn't fully understand the community rules, and at this point, it's not that important anymore. But here's a quick summary. Jane and I had been trying to have kids for 10 years. On the 8th year, we saved enough money to go through 3 rounds of IVF at the most successful reproductive clinic in our country. All 3 attempts failed. Jane started her affair during the 3rd round of IVF. That's also the clinic where I had my blood tested and found out about my family's history of diseases: diabetes, gout, hypertension, and stroke. In a weird way, I should thank them. Someone suggested that Jane might have intentionally aborted the 3rd embryo because it could have been Baldy's baby, but that's not possible. Jane's chances of conceiving naturally are almost non-existent. The embryos were fertilized in vitro and then implanted directly into her womb. After the 3rd failure, Jane told me she didn't want kids anymore, and I dropped the subject. I'm certain Baldy had nothing to do with her decision to stop trying for a baby. This will be relevant later. Now, let's get to the update. It's been 12 days since D-Day. What have I been up to since then? D-Day +1, Friday. I had a chat with Mr. P. He admitted that he had faked his shoulder injury. He just wanted to warn me about Baldy. He also mentioned that a nosy neighbor saw when I kicked Baldy out of my apartment, naked. By the end of the week, everyone in the condo would probably know about my situation. My brother came over to help me change the locks on the door. When he left, I felt a wave of loneliness and started crying again. I called my job and asked for a day off to collect myself. That night, I spoke with my lawyer. He said he had everything he needed to draft the divorce papers. My case would be filed as a divorce by mutual consent, which is smoother and quicker than an uncaused divorce, which tends to get nasty and drawn out. He also advised me not to share the video with anyone. Jane would be served in 2 weeks. When my sister-in-law, SIL, called, I told her to ask Jane directly why we were divorcing. D-Day +2, Saturday. My sister-in-law came over and I showed her the video. Her face went pale as she watched. I drove her home afterward, and when I got there, I saw Jane's car parked outside. That sight brought back all the pain. When I got back home, I still felt crushed and cried some more. D-Day +3, Sunday. I went to visit my parents. My mom cried with me, which broke me even more because she really loved Jane. My dad, always pragmatic, talked to me about my finances, properties, and the practical side of things. When I got back home, Mr. P mentioned that both Jane and Baldy had shown up at different times that day. Jane came in the morning, saw that my car wasn't there, and tried to enter the apartment. When her key didn't work, she asked Mr. P if he knew where I had gone. He handed her my attorney's card and told her that I was gone. Baldy showed up later in the afternoon. He first asked if Jane was around, and Mr. P emphasized, "Mrs. Jane doesn't live here anymore." Baldy then asked to see me, but Mr. P told him that I wasn't home and didn't know when I'd be back. He left without further incident. I wanted to ask Mr. P about Jane, how she looked, whether she seemed sad or asked about me, but I stopped myself. I thanked Mr. P and went inside. That night, I cried again. D-Day +4, Monday. I really didn't want to, but after reading countless posts from others going through similar situations, I realized I had to hit the gym. So I found a new gym close to my job and had a solid workout. I actually felt pretty good afterward. When I got home, I didn't cry for the first time since D-Day. I started taking down all the pictures of Jane around the house. D-Day +5, Tuesday. I met with my lawyer to review my assets. Thankfully, my dad had insisted on Jane signing a prenuptial agreement before we got married, which means she can't touch anything I had before the marriage, my house being the most significant asset. Everything else would be split 50-50, but I could seek compensation for her adultery. My lawyer suggested I take out alimony as part of that compensation. I thought about fighting for everything, but the truth is, most of it just reminded me of her. I wanted to start fresh, so I decided to keep it simple and move on. When I left the house that morning, I overheard some whispers from two neighbors. They quickly pretended they didn't see me and greeted me awkwardly as they passed. I knew this would happen eventually. Afterward, I hit the gym again and then headed to work. This became my new routine: gym and work, gym and work. D-Day +6, Wednesday. Nothing major happened. I stayed away from most social media, but I kept getting DMs asking me to talk to Jane. I ignored them. Instead, I logged onto Reddit and read through stories of other people who had gone through similar experiences. It was comforting to know I wasn't alone. Reading those stories helped me feel a little better. D-Day +7, Thursday. I started writing my own story on Reddit. I posted it before heading to the gym and didn't think much of it. Later, at work, I was amazed at how many people were reacting and commenting on my post. The support and understanding were overwhelming, and for the first time in a while, I found myself smiling. D-Day +8, Friday. I spent the morning responding to comments on Reddit. It felt good to engage with people who had been through what I was experiencing. Two comments stuck with me. One person suggested I report Baldy to my old gym, and another said that my home was tainted and that I needed a fresh start. That second comment hit me hard. I hadn't been able to step foot into my own bedroom since D-Day, and I'd been sleeping in the spare room. The house didn't feel like mine anymore. So, before heading to the gym, I contacted a few real estate agents to either sell or rent out the place. I couldn't live there anymore. D-Day +9, Saturday. Since Jane had been coming around to bother me, I decided to spend the day outside. Sure enough, she showed up, and then she visited my parents and brother. They both texted me saying, "Jane came by." I simply replied, "Thank you. I'm not ready to talk about her yet." D-Day +10, Sunday. I spent the day with my parents. We took a trip to a small town about 2 hours away, and it was a blast. I felt lighter being away from everything, even if just for a day. When I got back home, Mr. P told me Baldy had come by again. This time he asked for me, but Mr. P told him I was away. He left without a word. D-Day +11, Monday. Monday morning, I went back to my old gym. I wasn't sure if I would run into Baldy, but I figured he might have changed his shift. To my relief, he wasn't there. While I waited to speak with Frank, the gym owner, I bumped into an old janitor I used to chat with. He greeted me warmly and asked how Miss Jane was doing. I smiled politely, knowing that from now on I'd have to explain that Jane and I were no longer together. When Frank finally came to see me, I asked about Baldy. He told me Baldy had requested more hours and was now working from Tuesday to Sunday, mostly in the mornings. Then, I explained the real reason for my visit. Frank listened intently, and when I was done talking, I pulled out my phone and showed him the video. Frank looked serious and said, "You're not going to like this." My heart sank, thinking, what now? He called the receptionist to bring over Harry, another coach and a close friend of Baldy's. Harry, a guy with a big beard, walked in. Frank asked him to tell me about Baldy's girlfriend. I braced myself. According to Harry, Baldy was absolutely head over heels for Jane. Frank confirmed it. Apparently, Baldy had received numerous complaints, particularly from female gym members, about his inappropriate behavior in the past. But over the last few months, he had completely changed. No more complaints, and he was acting very professional with everyone. Harry then dropped a bombshell that made my jaw drop. Baldy was planning to marry Jane by baby-trapping her. I was processing this wild information when suddenly I felt something rise from my chest, up through my throat, and I burst out laughing. Not just a chuckle, a full-on Joker-style madman laugh. Tears streamed down my face. Frank and Harry just stared at me, utterly confused. My mind was reeling with thoughts like, "Oh, sweet karma, thank you." After I calmed down a bit, still grinning like a fool, Harry asked what was so funny. Frank explained, "This is Baldy's girlfriend's husband." Harry's face was a picture of shock. "Oh, man, this is bad. This is really messed up," Harry said before quickly leaving the room. Next, Frank and I discussed Baldy's job. Frank said he would have to report the situation to the Coach Association, and it was very likely that Baldy would be fired. Since Jane had been a gym member, Frank's gym could face legal repercussions if Baldy stayed. As for Baldy's coaching license, I needed to file a legal document stating that Baldy was the cause of my divorce, providing the case number, and including the video as evidence. My attorney would handle giving the video to the Coach Association's lawyer. Baldy would lose his license with them, but he could apply for a new one through a different association. It would just take months. I asked Frank if Baldy could appeal the decision, and he said it was possible, but would likely be a waste of time. The association had zero tolerance for such conduct. Plus, Baldy didn't have the money to hire legal representation. That reminded me of the fancy residential area where I'd seen Baldy and Jane. I had assumed Baldy was wealthy. Frank's eyes narrowed as he asked, "What residential area?" I showed him the location on the map, explaining I had tailed them there the day before D-Day. Frank's face turned red with anger. "That's where my late father's house is," he exclaimed. Apparently, after Frank's father passed away, Frank had inherited the house and used it as storage for old or damaged gym equipment. Baldy had access to the house occasionally to drop off some gear, but he did not have permission to stay there. Frank realized that Baldy probably made a copy of the key and was living there illegally. He promised to investigate further since the place had security cameras everywhere. As I was leaving the gym, I heard someone call out, "Mr. OP, wait!" It was Harry. He apologized for everything that was happening and said Baldy had never told him who his girlfriend was. He only mentioned meeting her at a mall. I thanked him and started walking toward the exit when he blurted out, "Can you tell me what happened?" I paused and said, "Pretty much what you heard. He was screwing my wife, and now I'm divorcing her." I took another step, but Harry quickly added, "What's going to happen to Baldy?" I replied, "That depends on Frank and the Coach Association." I took another step, but Harry pressed on, "But how are you handling it?" This was starting to get strange. I stared at Harry, and suddenly it clicked. Baldy had come to my house twice already. I asked, "You called Baldy, didn't you?" "He's on his way here, right? You're just buying time. Am I wrong?" Harry made a guilty face. "Please, Mr. OP, talk to him. He's really desperate. He was crying yesterday. His girlfriend, your wife, won't return his calls." I looked at Harry coldly and asked, "Tell me, why should I care if he's rotting in hell?" Harry replied, "I'll be here with you so you don't have to be scared." I laughed. "Scared? Of that weakling? He didn't tell you that I kicked him out of my house naked, did he?" Harry didn't believe me, but I shrugged it off. "Fine. Let's see what he wants." I noticed there were security cameras where we were standing, so I sat down at a table in the reception area, confident that Baldy wasn't stupid enough to attack me. Still, I was curious about what he had to say. Baldy came running about 10 minutes later, clearly in a hurry, and saw me sitting there, waiting for him. He extended his hand, but I crossed my arms, leaving him hanging. "What the hell do you want?" I asked, staring him down with as much anger as I could muster. He sat in front of me, trying to look sincere. "Listen, buddy. Stop right there. We're not buddies. Mr. S., the janitor, is my buddy. You're not." Baldy looked a little sheepish. "Okay, my bad. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for everything. I never wanted to hurt you, and I really care about Jane." I scoffed. "Well, you just told me 3 lies to my face. You're not sorry, you did mean to destroy my life, and you only care about yourself." He went from apologetic to annoyed pretty quickly. Okay, whatever, man. Just tell me where Jane is. Last time I saw her, I said, was when I kicked her cheating ass out of my house, right after I kicked you out, naked. I could feel Harry eavesdropping on the conversation, and Baldy's face flushed with embarrassment. That was a cheap shot. I should sue you for that. As far as I know, you entered my home illegally. Maybe you were raping my wife. I've got video of you running out of there, but you didn't sign in anywhere, did you? His attitude shifted once again. Okay, I'm sorry. What do you want from me? Just tell Jane I need to talk to her. At that moment, Frank rushed in. He must have been watching on the cameras and saw that Baldy had arrived. Everything okay here? He asked. Everything's fine, Frank, I replied. I was just telling this sissy what I want. I stood up, got close to Baldy's face, and said, What I want is for you to get what's coming to you. What you deserve, what the law has prepared for you. I want to crush your dreams, just like you crushed mine. You want kids? Guess what? You won't have any. You'll never have any. Baldy stammered. What's that supposed to... But Frank cut him off. Come with me, Baldy. Let's talk in my office. Harry, still looking impressed, grabbed Baldy's arm and whispered, Dude, you're in deep shit. And just like that, I finally left the gym. D-Day plus 12, Tuesday. I feel ready to face Jane now. I'm still grinning while I type this. So, how have you all been? TLDR. I caught my wife with our gym coach in our bed, and now I know when and how it all started.